My name is Marina Antunes with the Spark CG Society. Really excited and very pleased to be here to introduce this fantastic celebration of 40 years of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's hard to believe. Before we start, I just want to take a moment to introduce the panelists. They really need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyways because when you actually read it and say it, it's super impressive what these two men have accomplished over the span of their careers. Mr. Richard Edlund is a 20-year governor of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and a founding member of the AMPA's Visual Effects branch. He's the chair of the branch executive committee and also the chair of the Academy Science and Technology Council. He also serves as board member of the Visual Effects Society and on the board of directors for the American Society of Cinematographers. He is a 4-time Academy Awards visual effect winner for Star Wars: A New Hope, Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, The Return of the Jedi, and of course the film we're here to talk about today, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Also joining him in conversation is Mr. Warren Franklin, a 40-year veteran of the entertainment industry as an executive and creative producer with such industry leaders as Lucasfilm, and he's collaborated with projects with all of the major Hollywood studios. For 13 years, he was the key member of George Lucas's creative team, where he served as group vice president, managing 6 of the divisions, including Industrial Light and Magic, LucasArts, and Skywalker Sound. As VP and GM of ILM, Warren spearheaded the company's growth and dominance as the industry's premier visual effects company. And along the way, he took home 9 Oscars, which isn't a bad run either, including an Oscar award for this film. I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Warren Franklin and Mr. Richard Edlund. And if you guys have questions for the panelists, you can pop those into the Q&A or into the chat window. We'll be taking those throughout the presentation and we'll get to them at the end. So take it off, Mr. Warren.
Thanks, Marina. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is quite a treat to have Richard with us. I emailed Richard a few weeks ago about whether he'd be willing to do a panel on Raiders, and he wrote me back in about 1 minute saying that was my favorite movie. So this, 40 years ago, so it's a long time, but it was an amazing project for all of us to work on. And it was really the first film that ILM had done that was not based in space. So everything needed to really have a certain look to it. It had to be real world. It was a very ambitious project. So Richard was brought on very early on to read the script and figure out how to do it. So let me introduce Richard and let him talk a little bit about how he started on Raiders and how that experience was.
I mean, Raiders was a fantastic project. I mean, the thing about Raiders was George said, listen, guys, this is a B movie. And understand, Stephen, that if you don't shoot the scenes from that day, you tear the pages out and you make it work. So this was very difficult for Stephen to grasp onto, and he didn't basically until we got to London. I mean, first of all, the crews in London were they had specific union problems in that they could only work 8 hours a day, and if you wanted to work 8.5 hours, you had to poll the crew, and if anybody in the crew couldn't do that, then you only worked 8 hours. Well, this didn't work for Stephen, and somehow Stephen, with his fantastic grandiose of a personage, he was able to go beyond that, and we wound up working 10, 12 hours a day sometimes. And this was a kind of a first for England. And the crew was really fabulous. I mean, with the production designer and all the crew, I mean, we had the British film industry in our hands, and Stephen was able to extricate what was required to do Raiders. And when I got there, Kathy Kennedy, who was at that time had graduated from a PA to a associate producer, and she was working up their way. And Frank Marshall was the producer. Dr. Fantasy, it was called. Anyhow, it was really a fantastic episode in my life, because Star Wars was a fantasy, and we could get away with a lot of things visually that you normally couldn't get away with because of the fantasy. But Raiders was not that. I mean, Raiders was happening in kind of a realistic era. And of course we had the Nazis as the bad guys. And of course that worked very well in the show. And we went on to do what we did. I mean, in many instances, I was called upon to kind of second unit direct situations that were not really in the script. And I mean, one interesting situation had to do with when the Nazis put the Ark in the hold of the ship. There was a scene in the hold of the ship where the Ark was this precious, never found object. Stephen said, "Look, well, there's rats down there." He says, "I want the rats to cower." And I thought, oh, okay, well, let's figure out how to do that. Well, anyway, there was a really fabulous rat wrangler who somehow knew about a particular rat that had an earwig problem, and would go into these strange cowering episodes, and I was able to shoot that. And in order to shoot it, I had this big VistaVision camera that was weighed about 100 pounds. I had to flap it over on its back and put it on roller skates in order to shoot these rats running around the Ark in the case. And I wound up was able to get a shot of the rat going through this incredible reaction to the sound effect that was happening from the crate that had the Ark in it. And we looked at there on the Ark, there was the Nazi eagle, and the Nazi eagle became on fire, and which we shot in post-production. And that whole sequence had to do with the rat, and the rat, because Stanley Kubrick was shooting on one of the stages at EMI, and he would not get off this particular stage. So we had to shoot a bunch of scenes in stages that we didn't have enough stages to shoot. But Vivian used to come around the set, and she was like a persona non grata to Stephen. And at one point, when we had the Well of Souls, where we had all the snakes, and there were like about I don't know, about 30,000. I mean, how many snakes? A bunch of rubber snakes were laying on the ground, on the surface of the Well of Souls, but a number of the snakes were like black snakes that they found about 20,000 or 10,000 or many of these other snakes that were sneaking around there. And anyway, Vivian became such a persona non grata that when she came on the set one day and saw a couple of snakes that had died because of Big Grip's boots had stepped on them, and she went to the SPCA and made this big stink about the snakes being mishandled. And so we wound up naming the rat that I mentioned earlier. The rat's name was Vivian. and of course, may he rest in peace, Stanley Kubrick never knew about this probably, but in any case, that was the way we produced that scene. And there were many others like that, but
I think Richard, you know, for the I remember reading the Raiders script for the first time. It just read amazing. Larry Kasdan wrote it. You saw the movie as you read it, and it had so many really, you know, when you look at it from a visual effects standpoint, really hard sequences to do. Really nothing that, you know, not much that people had ever really tried to do before. You know, kind of in you know, post Star Wars, where, you know, the sophistication of the viewers is so much stronger in terms of what visual effects, how to make visual effects and how they need to look. But I was thinking about it and I'd like you to comment on this. I mean, you must have used basically every visual effects technique that had been developed up until this point for Raiders. You used cloud tank, you used matte paintings, you used miniature, large scale miniatures, you used animation, you used prosthetics, you used amazing pyro. Can you talk a little bit about some of that stuff?
There were so many amazing things that had to be created for the opening of the Ark sequence, for example. I mean, the thing is that when they finally opened the Ark, the lid of the Ark blew up and flew up into the sky. Somebody's phone is ringing. Anyway, one day when we were shooting some clouds, somebody stepped on the hose. There was a hose. There was the cloud tank was this big 6 foot square, 4 foot deep tank. And what we did is we would fill the tank halfway with fresh water and float salt water on the top. I mean, in the reverse. I'm sorry, we had salt water on the bottom and we would float fresh water on top. And we had an inversion layer, which enabled us to squirt dyes on the surface to create clouds. And somebody stepped on the hose to empty the tank, and it blew a hole in the clouds. And I thought, that's it. This was like one of the great things that happened that you never thought would happen on the set, that created something that had never been done. And so that's how we created the hole in the clouds. And in order to do the hole in the clouds, my special effects genius, Thane Morris, came up because we had to blow the lid of the Ark up towards the camera and flip around, and when you saw the clouds open, and he came up with like a very low velocity shotgun shell underneath the Ark, which was about 3 inches by 2 by 3 inches, And I had the camera on the ceiling about 20 feet up, and I had to hand crank the focus to make sure it was sharp on the way up. And we did 2 takes, and take 1 was the take, because the arc lid came flipping up towards the camera and just missed the lens as I pulled focus on it. And we got the shot. We did 2 takes, but we used take 1. And so I mean, there were a lot of these kind of things. The other thing was like to control the fire, because the fire was going to snake up towards the clouds, and so Thane and I worked out this like a week-long shoot of fire spiraling up in the clouds, and we used black aluminum painted black, and then shotgun powder to blow up through that, and we had to use the natural effect of fire, and we turned the camera on its side to shoot turn it on the camera on this other angle in order to create the fire that created the effect that the audience has become to love. So I mean, and then of course when Indy and Marion were at the stake, when we were shooting in London, there was a scene that Stephen shot, because this whole thing about the opening of the Ark was this big Jewish thing, and so he somehow found this rabbi to come and to help him go through the problem of dealing with these issues. And he spent about a day and a half shooting a bunch of scenes with this rabbi that never wound up in the movie, because when we wound up with the final opening of the Ark sequence, we only had 2 days left. And of course, George said, "You got 2 days, shoot it," you know. And so basically we did all the long shots on the sets. And I went by with Norman Reynolds, who was this fantastic production designer who had done Star Wars and Empire, and was a wonderful guy that he'd build the world before you knew that it was there. I mean, he was a fantastic construction guy. Anyway, I went through the set with Norman and picked a bunch of parts of the set, and I said, we'll send these to Marin County. And so we wound up with a couple of cargo containers full of set parts that we had to wind up building the whole the whole interaction of the Nazis during that sequence in Marin County. We had Marin County Nazis to shoot the scene. And what another interesting thing about that, which I'll jump away from it. I mean, first of all, the scene with that looking down from the Ark back towards the Nazis was a miniature scene, and the camera that was shooting the scene at the Ark was a Mitchell with the rabbit ears. It was a Mitchell. It was an American camera that was used to shoot the scene. And much later, when we were doing the composites, we the the scene that was being shot of the Nazis going back was shot with an Airflex camera and a Pan Airy, a German camera, and the scene of the Nazis shooting the opening of the Ark was shot with an American camera. And when we were in the projection room one day, going through certain scenes, there was a scene where we saw the Nazis down on the, where we shot in London. We shot the Nazis, and this is before the animation was added, but it was during the time the animation was added by us. But anyway, someone said, "Hey, isn't that a camera crew in the scene?" and there was very dark in the lower right hand corner of the scene was this scene shooting the Nazis with this Pan Airy, and after take five, we were watching take five, and George says, "I like the shot, let's go with it." And somebody said, "But isn't that a camera crew in the shot?" And George says, "Yeah, it is, but we hadn't seen it until now, so let's go with it." So we let that scene go in the movie, and I looked for it, and maybe that had been modified in the subsequently releases, but in fact there was a very dark shot of the Airflex shooting that scene, but it went in the movie anyway.
Yeah, it was nice when you didn't look at things 100 times. George would always look at, if you hadn't seen it, after 3 or 4 times, it was fine. Like, leave it.
Right.
Move on.
Exactly. And that was the thing. And the thing is that, I mean, the whole attitude of the camera of this scene being we're shooting a serial that was a 40s serial here, basically.
Yeah.
That's where it came out of. And as far as he was concerned, it was a B movie.
Yeah. Which
it didn't turn out to be.
But it was made on it was a pretty low budget. I think the budget was $20 million at that point, which is not a high budget. Well, high for today's standard if you factored it for inflation. But Steven had just done that huge 1941 film, which had really kind of bombed, and it had huge effects. And I think George had to go to bat for him to get him to direct Raiders, to the studio, and said, "No, this guy knows what he's doing. You should let him do this movie with me."
Well, the problem is that George said, "We're not going to do 10 takes." Because the thing is, when he was doing it in 1941, he would do 9 or 10 takes on a comedy. And when you shoot a comedy, I worked with comedy directors like Harold Ramis subsequently. And basically, when you're shooting a comedy, basically, you need to get it across in a take or two. And if you start doing more takes, it starts getting tainted. And so basically that was the directive that Steven had, that we're not going to do 10 takes. Like I said earlier, if you got 5 pages to shoot that day, you're going to shoot those 5 pages. And if you don't, you have to make whatever you shot work, because we're going to tear those pages out of the script. So it was a fantastic how to make a movie for me and for Steven. And unfortunately, it was one of his really great movies. And fortunately it was. And we all loved the movie, and Harrison Ford, God gave Harrison Ford the movie. I mean, I'd heard earlier that George didn't want Harrison. He wanted Tom Selleck to play Harrison. And I mean, where would Raiders be without Harrison Ford? I mean, he had the magic, the magic to make that movie work. And Karen Allen was fantastic. I mean, she was such a great casting for that movie. And George didn't want to use her either. And Stephen didn't want, they were all, but they made it work, and it worked. And so basically, in a lot of ways, the movie worked in a lot of ways that they didn't think it might.
Yeah. Yep.
But I mean, I got my hats off to Harrison. I love him as a person and as a character. I mean, he was so perfect for that role, and Karen Allen was so great. I mean, that scene between them and when he fell asleep on her. I mean, what a great scene that was. And I mean, these kind of scenes happen, and they're not necessarily in the script, but they happen as a result of the interaction between the actors. And there was such chemistry between Harrison and Harrison and Marion and Karen, And then, I mean, getting back to what I was talking about earlier, when we got the set pieces back from England, and we built in the stages at ILM the sequences that hadn't been shot, and the close-ups and Indian Marion at the stake. And I shot that scene with them on the set. I have this great shot, this great still of me frolicking with Harrison, where I have his 45 stuck in my belt, and he's throwing the whip around me. I mean, it's one of my great remembrances of the movie.
Well, I think the other thing, I think similar to like you're talking about with the live action stuff, where there were accidents that happened with the actors and things that, when Harrison pulled his gun out, and just rather than, just shot that guy, that was a very controversial scene. But I think, the way you shot the visual effects, there weren't a lot of takes for visual effects either, from the explosion, from the heads melting to the different things that you did with pyrotechnics. Right. You only had a few, you had only a few takes to do that. It wasn't like today where you can go back in the computer 100 times and get it exactly perfect,
Well, looking at that sequence, and thinking of the Nazis facing the Ark in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we need to have some kind of light effects on them, because they're going to be shot through with lightning from God, right? And in order to do that, I built it must have been about 30 rigs to take to London with me, and they basically had a light coming up that would light their face. It was a thing that they wore underneath their costume. And they basically had, in the front, there was a gooseneck that came out. They had a light that shot right at their faces. And in the back, there was a flash bulb. And I had discovered these special flash bulbs that were built back in the 40s or 50s for high-speed photography, where it was a flash bulb that lasted for about 2.5 seconds. It was like the sunlight went off for 2.5 seconds. And it was this big bulb, about like a 200-watt bulb. And basically, all of the Nazis on the back of this rig that I built, they had this flash bulb. And we had to then go back, and we would cut through their shirts so that the flashbulb would burn out of the shirts they were wearing, and in this 2.5 seconds thing, and each one of them had like a little switch under their arm, and each one they were instructed to push the button when they thought it was right. And so we basically did the shot, and this was a one-shot deal. And so basically we had all the Nazis with all these rigs on them, and they had lights that were lit down their pants from lights from electricity. And then they had the light bulb behind their shirt, and it worked so great. I mean, when they all pushed the button, and then later on when we did the animation that came, down from the ark towards them. I mean, it was a really fantastic scene. And then there was another scene where at the end of the scene, the power from the ark spewed forth from the ark and threw all these Nazis up into the air. And they were all Ken dolls, basically. They were about this tall. And they had Nazi uniforms on. And we shot them you shot them shooting out of sort of a cannon at ILM. And this is the kind of thing, it's sort of like it's sort of like the shark from Jaws. The shark from Jaws didn't actually work, but in order to make the scene work, you had to, with Michael Kahn's masterful editing, they made this shark into this fantastic character. Well, this is the same kind of situation with these Nazis. And in the Nazis, they're flying up through fire. And Thane built these it's like a huge shotgun that shot the Nazis up through the fire. And you see them tumbling through the fire. And that was only in the scene, that was only in the movie for like, I mean, you maybe only saw these Nazis for maybe half a second, but it was there and it worked. And the scene of the Nazis being blown away was shot upside down. And I basically turned the whole set upside down, and we blew this gunpowder down through the fire and blew the Nazis past the camera. And using gravity as your friend, and this was in the analog world, so we didn't have digital ability to manipulate things, so we had to do everything with gravity and what we had available to us. So that was another thing. And then, I mean, another guy, the guy that deserves a great deal of credit for all this is Thane Morris, this fantastic guy who's one of my favorite humans. He's still my great friend.
Yeah, Thane did an amazing job on that film, on all the films he did, but that in particular, you guys just were able to create magic out of just fire, and without any kind of digital manipulation or anything. I mean, it's just, and you just only have a few takes. You have to make it work. It's
right. Then we had the ghost that comes up, the beautiful girl that comes up that becomes a skeleton, and that was, I mean, we wound up hiring this beautiful Playboy model and put her on a body pan and brought her towards the camera, and then did a dissolve to the skull. I mean, it was all done with physical tricks, and we had in Raiders we had learned how to create the effect that we needed the audience to leave the theater with by using physical tricks that they would never be able to figure out how we did it. And it happened so fast and so perfectly that that was part of the magic of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Richard, did you end up shooting the last scene of the movie? That was
I did.
The one that,
Actually, that's interesting. I'm glad you bring that up because the last scene in the movie was Harrison and Marion coming down the stairs after they heard about we have the best men working on this project. And I basically had my lighting guys from ILM, and there were about 6 or 7 guys who lit the entire interior of the city hall that we were able to get. And then I shot Harrison and Marion coming down the steps, and a little dialogue scene between them with f1.4 lenses. And at this time, we only had ASA 100 movie. We had 100 film. So I had these sort of soft Panavision lenses, but I knew we needed to have the stop. So I shot them at 1.4, wide open. And the whole sequence came out and worked really well. And basically after that, we finished the whole scene. The guys lit it. The guys came in and lit the whole interior of the city hall in about maybe 30 or 40 minutes. And we finished shooting the movie by noon. And so we wound up going to this little restaurant on Sutter Street for lunch. And I'm sitting there with Stephen, and Stephen had never ordered shark before. And they had shark on the menu. And so we both ordered shark. And meanwhile, behind me on the left was Frank Marshall, the producer, who had his eye on this girl that was sitting at the bar right behind us. And so I looked over to Steve, I looked over to Frank, and Frank was sitting there. And then I looked over to Steve, and we ordered our shark. And then I looked back over to Frank, and he was writing the girl's phone number on a matchbook cover. Dr. Fantasy. I mean, Frank Marshall was like a fantastic guy, and was the producer of the show, and basically I think they may have fallen in love during Raiders, and they wound up marrying.
Yep.
But anyway, it was a fantastic ending to a movie. Then we basically also we shot the scene of them getting on the Panama Clipper, and somebody discovered that there was a Solent Panama Clipper type of airplane in the parking in a field over in the it was over in beyond Berkeley. How they got it there, I don't know, but it was like this huge airplane was sitting there in the grass. And so I basically, to do that scene, we built a platform along the edge of the plane so they could walk along the platform into the plane for like about a 10-minute scene, 10-second scene. And then I shot a scene of the water from Angel's Island up on in the middle of Richardson Bay. I shot the scene of the water looking in the direction that I needed to look with the light. And Alan Maley did a matte painting of the Panama Clipper. We matted in the people who were walking into the plane, and put that scene together with three plates, and it worked like a champ. And then I shot the interior scene with Harrison sitting there, and we saw Dennis Murin sitting in the back seat looking up over a newspaper. He played like a Nazi, a Nazi spy or something like that, looking over.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, it's like the stories abound, and I could wake up at night and remember them
Yeah.
in great detail and with great.
Do you remember, Richard? I was trying to remember the scene that when you shot the miniature submarine.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In Richardson Bay, I think. But I think we had to go back and reshoot that because people at the preview, they couldn't figure out what happened to Harrison or something. We needed to establish how he'd actually escaped from the island. Or something. So
Right.
Yeah.
And they had this scene of him on top of a submarine that they shot that I think had been used from some German Nazi movie or something like
Right.
that. They found a submarine and they shot some scenes of that. And they shot the whole scene in the submarine bay over there, but we had to shoot the scene that got them there.
Right.
And so the model shop guys found a submarine and rebuilt it. And I luckily found a telephone pole sticking out of Richardson Bay, out in the middle of the bay. And I thought, God, we could build a platform there and I could shoot a plate of the island out in the middle of Richardson Bay. And that would be, and we could have the submarine, I could shoot down so the submarine would not cross over the island. And so they built a platform there, and I shot the scene of the submarine going by with a miniature Harrison on it, and then composited. Then did a matte painting of the island with the submarine bay. You could see the submarine hole, the hole in the side of the island where the submarine was going. Anyway, and I remember seeing about maybe 10 years ago, there was a Raiders of the Lost Ark showing at the museum nearby in Westwood here. And I went there to see the movie, and everything looked great. But when I saw the island, it actually was pulsating a little bit. It wasn't steady. And I can't remember. I mean, I don't know if anybody ever noticed that, but it bugged the hell out of me because I could never realize why the shot was unsteady and how that would ever gotten past the finals. But anyway, that was one of the scenes that we shot, and I don't know how many shots there were in the movie. I lost count, but anyway.
I think that we thought there were about 70, maybe, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
But then when the ghosts are swimming around, that was all shot in the cloud tank. And basically, what I did when I had guys up above moving with a stick, with like a torso with like flowing wedding veil trailing behind them. And then I basically had them do that, and we wound up shooting those in reverse. And wound up playing them in reverse. And when they play in reverse, they come towards the camera in this ungodly way. And that's basically how we did a lot of the ghosts that were swimming around in the Wrath of God sequence.
We have
the Wrath of God sequence is great. And I basically came up with the Wrath of God chili for the chili cook-off.
We have about 15
online somewhere, but anyway.
We have about 15 minutes left, and I thought maybe we could get to a couple of audience questions because we have some really good ones. And I wanted
lots of questions.
Yeah, I wanted to start with this one because I think it's really interesting. And Warren, maybe you can speak to it from sort of the executive standpoint. Jason asks, the melting face is biblical during the opening of the Ark scene. How many takes or attempts were made for that VFX? And what was it like getting it reviewed and approved by the executive filmmaking team?
One take.
One take.
I'm glad you brought that up because I mean we can't let the movie play without that scene. Chris Wayless, who was one of our most talented creature guys, created Toad's head. So we started with a skull and then painted it red, and then he's put various layers of and it's I forgot what they call it. It's like a dental material that's like, it's like flesh-like. And basically he built up the face with these layers of this flesh-like material, and then created Toad's face that was like unmistakably Toad. And basically I shot this with industrial heat guns focused on the head that would melt this dental alginate that Chris had created. And I think I basically wound up shooting at like one or two frames a second. And I was really worried about the glasses, because he had glasses, and when the glasses would fall off, I wasn't sure what that was going to happen. So I was really worried about that. But we wound up shooting the scene, and it took like a minute or two to shoot the scene, to melt the face. And then when we saw the footage, it worked really well, but we had to skip frame, and we printed like every fourth frame or every fifth frame or something like that,
Right. Yeah.
in order to compress it into the time that was necessary to make the scene work. And the glasses fell down on his nose, and then they fell off, and they fell off in a frame, and you didn't notice that because you were so glued on the fact that here's this face that's melting in front of your face, and the other guy, I mean, Detlef or whoever it was, the Nazi, we sucked his face in. We used that was shot as a scene, and I don't think we even had to skip frame that. But so he compressed, and that was the end of him. And then we cut back to Toad, and Toad's face melted, and God, everybody loves that scene, including me.
It's a great scene.
Anyway, it was a great scene, and a tribute to Chris Wayless, who did the work.
Right. And we didn't have there was no executive team. The amazing thing about Lucasfilm is it was run by filmmakers, and Stephen and George would decide what they wanted. The guys from Paramount who financed the film, we couldn't even allow them in dailies. They saw the film when we saw the film in San Francisco at the preview. So, it shows what can be made when you let the filmmakers just make the movies and don't get.
There was a screening at Paramount.
Right.
One night. And who was there but Eisner and
Diller, Barry Diller, I think was.
Eisner, Diller, and Katzenberg.
Right.
Were there in the office together. They were all, at the time, executives at Paramount. And they were all convinced this was going to be a monster movie. And I remember having a meeting with them after the show. And they were all like so excited because they knew that this was going to be a blockbuster movie. They could all see it, and it was, and it's one of the great action adventure movies of all time, I think, along with Die Hard and I mean, I was lucky enough to do Die Hard also, later. But I mean, to do action adventure movies like this were some great times in my career.
Richard, you talked a little bit about how there were some happy accidents. I was wondering what one of the questions from Damien is, what is the biggest happy accident from making Raiders?
Well, God, there were so many, and you've got me there. I mean, the one that's the most obvious was the hole in the clouds. I mean, that was so incredible to see the clouds open up with this big hole in the middle, and then the arc shooting up into the thing. And I mean, that sequence was spellbinding, and will continue to be as long as movies are made. And I don't know that any digital technology could have come up with those kind of ideas. I mean, the thing about the difference between photochemical effects that we were doing during Raiders and the digital effects that are happening now is that in digital effects, everything has to be preconceived and created frame by frame. And so the happy accident doesn't ever happen because it's such an intellectual process. And so basically what you had in movies like Star Wars and Empire and Raiders and the movies that happen as a result of a lot of these happy accidents that happen during the shoot will never be replicated. I mean, it's like a testament to the time. In other words, in a sense, I basically lived during the sweet spot of the visual effects renaissance. Star Wars created the renaissance of visual effects, and Raiders and Die Hard and the other, and Empire and Die Hard and Ghostbusters and all those movies that were done with photochemical means and no photographic, no digital technology worked and continue to work. And they don't work as well when they try to redo them. I'm waiting to see what happens with the next Ghostbusters, because Ivan's son did another, he did and I think he was trying to do an homage to Ghostbusters.
Actually,
He was a
Jason
little
has,
kid on the set when we were doing Ghostbusters. I remember him.
Right.
Jason actually has an interesting question that ties into what you were just talking about. And you worked on so many films over the years, and he's asking, with the tools that are available, the VFX tools that are available now, how hard or how different was it 40 years ago to go from script to screen compared to today?
I think that the what we were expected to come up with caused a lot of sleepless nights, and the sleepless nights somehow contributed to the creation of these fantastic movies. And sadly, I think that what's happening now, visual effects have become a commodity. I mean, there's not a day in the week that there isn't 1,000 or 1,500 shots in the pipeline at Marvel, and they're creating these incredible, okay, and maybe, I mean, what's his name? Who did the sinking of New York? Roland Emmerich should be jailed for creating horrible things against the citizens of New York. I mean, how many millions of people were drowned by this movie? I mean, it's like, and the thing is that these kind of things that happen now are, I mean, the thing is that because in the digital world, you now have millions of addressable pixels. And the fact that you can address all of these pixels by using super technology, you can create anything and anything has already been done. Everything has already been done. They've already seen the Golden Gate Bridge collapse. They've seen New York being drowned. You know, I mean, and all these horrible cities that have been destroyed by horrible attacks from God knows what. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm being, I don't want to get biblical about this, but in a sense, it's a shame in a certain way. I mean, the thing is that since it's possible to do everything now, everything has already been done. And so consequently, it's like putting more and more stuff that is visually intense and I don't know. I mean, it's like, where's it going to go? I don't know.
It's less is more. I mean, if you look at the Star Wars original 3 films that we did, and then you look at the prequels, you know, George got to put all the stuff in that he would have liked to put into the first films, but he had to be selective. He had to edit it. He had to just get the most important thing out of it. And I think that's like with Raiders, is that nothing is put in there for just like a visual trick. It's put in there because it's part of the story, and people get engaged about it because it's part of the story. And these films are built now on just all these gigantic effects. I mean, the end of the movie, Act 3, always has some massive, you know, I want something no one's ever seen before, rather than a story that sort of brings you to the Act 3 and you want to actually have a, you know, an experience that makes sense for the story. And yeah, it's a whole different world. I mean, you can still, even the films, you know, we did Terminator 3 for James Cameron, you know, and that was only like 100, I think it was even, what was it, like 50 shots or something, you know, and people think that that's like some massive visual effects film. It wasn't, you know, it was a really strong story. Yeah, it's
I'm curious to kind of wrap things up here. It's
almost things have changed.
Things have to. I'm curious, you know, you both have long careers in visual effects, and you know, one of the themes that I've seen emerging this year as part of Spark FX is this idea of real-time technologies and where that's all taking us. And I'm curious if you could speak at all to how you think that's kind of reshaping the way we make movies, because it also feels like, yes, there's this new thing that people are using, but in some cases it's being used in combination with practical effects and stuff that, you know, we haven't really seen in the past. Like I'm thinking specifically of The Mandalorian, which makes use of real time, but it also uses puppets. So I mean, that's something that, you know, has kind of gone out of fashion. So I'm curious if you can kind of finish with, you know, we've talked a little bit about the state, but where do you think things are going? Are we moving in the right direction?
Well, I'm working on a project right now with a cameraman who used to work for me. He's a really smart guy who has written with his partner a 10-part series on Cuba, starting with 1964 and working back to the boys in the beards in the forest, you know, with Castro and Che and all this, and Batista and Meyer Lansky and all the stuff that happened in Cuba between 1954 and 1964. And as a proof of concept, we recreated JFK. And what we did is we took an actor who had done JFK as an actor. He's like 4 or 5 inches taller than JFK and doesn't look anything like JFK really, but he has the voice and the mannerisms of JFK. We shot a scene in my office with him interviewing, this is Kennedy, interviewing a senator. It's about there's 9 shots of Kennedy in the sequence. And basically, my friend who has a colleague who, with a couple of MIT PhDs who are like really schooled in AI, have come up with a technology to teach the algorithm teach the algorithm to recognize personality traits in footage that we input. And we have created a sequence of 9 shots of JFK interviewing this guy in my office, and it's going to drop your jaws. I mean, here's JFK interviewing this guy in my camera room. And I mean, it's like, but you know, and so there's a lot. I mean, it's difficult. It's more difficult, for example, with doing this with JFK, because there's not a lot of color footage on him. Most of it's in black and white, and lots of it is with speeches, and so to find the right footage to teach the algorithm these technology traits was very difficult, and these guys were able to do it, and so the whole idea of the series is to recreate JFK, Jackie, maybe Ben Bradley, Meyer Lansky, of course Castro and Che at different times, because there's 10 years here, and that's the whole kind of concept behind the series. And the thing is, when you do historical series where you have actors portraying somebody that doesn't look anything like them, it doesn't work. But in this case, this sequence, this series that they've written, which is very complex and deals with all of the intricacies of the Cuban Revolution and how it came about. That's the series here. So I'm still at it, you know, and of course they got now Tom Cruise doing things that he would never do. I mean, and they've got well, you probably all, you know, maybe by this time have seen Kevin Spacey being replaced with what's his name? Oh, geez. Mm-hmm. Kevin Spacey was replaced with an actor who doesn't look anything like Kevin Spacey, but has his personality. I mean, this kind of stuff is happening, and so the expectations of the audience have increased in ways that we never would have thought they would, and this kind of a series that we're trying to put together would testify to
that. And Warren, what about you?
So yeah, I mean, that's
actually, Jackie is going to be much more difficult than JFK, because women are more difficult to do than men, as men will always tell you.
Yeah. I think where it's going that's exciting. I mean, if you look at The Mandalorian and all the stuff that's being able just to be done in camera with the directors being able to see the whole environment that they're working in and the actors, I think it's going to give access to you know, younger directors that are going to be able to use this in different ways, you know, and it's not going to be, you know, when we were doing this, you had to be doing a pretty large budget movie to use visual effects. You had to be George Lucas or Steven Spielberg or Bob Zemeckis or James Cameron, or, you know, and I think the younger independent filmmakers, you know, the people that are going to be the next George Lucas or Steven Spielberg or Cameron or whoever, you know, have access now to a big toolkit that young filmmakers didn't have before. Really, you would not be able to do all the things you can do now digitally. So I think we'll see things that'll be very, very inventive and break some new ground that we can't even really think about what that might be really. But that's what I find exciting is seeing the young filmmakers taking this stuff and doing new things with it that, you know, well, out of the box.
You know, as a number of years ago, going back to Lon Chaney turning into the werewolf with dissolves, and it was like this kind of clunky project to do that. I mean, everybody was like looking forward to the morph. And in the 80s, the morph became possible with digital technology. And before you know it, you could buy morph at the computer store down the street for $29, you know, and you could do your own. I mean, the thing is that, like you're saying, Warren, I mean, that's exactly what's going to happen. And this technology of being able to teach the algorithm personality traits will also become something that's going to be universally and cheap. and so what's the world going to be? I mean, we thought it was all great when we were doing Raiders.
It was great.
It was, and it will ever be.
No, we made Empire Strikes Back and Raiders with a visual effects crew of about 80 people, you know, and you look at a credit list now and it's what, like 500 people. It's like crazy. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. It's been so wonderful having you here. Thank you to everybody that tuned in and for your amazing questions. Warren, Richard, thank you again. Congratulations on, 40 years of Raiders, 40 years of amazing films, and here is hopefully to another 40 years of great content. So thank you both so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm only 80.
Yeah.
Exactly. 40 more years of movies. I love it.
And somebody asked a question about Michael Pangrazio's matte painting, which we didn't answer, whether it took him really 3 months. It probably did take him 3 months because he had to start in so close on the arc and then pull back that it was like super detail. It was not a normal matte painting. It's quite a piece of art. Yeah.
And the thing is that Neil Crepola, who shot that, and it was this very complicated, because the color had to be separated. So, you're dealing with color separations with a front projection matte system that was done with an old CinemaScope lens that I had. And he actually recomposited that scene several times because they kept changing the title. They kept changing, there's somebody's name that got left off, and you have to reshoot the whole title. I mean, because the matte painting had to be reshot with all the titles up. I mean, that was a nightmare, and of course that's one of the classic matte paintings of all time.
Yes. Anyway, just had to answer that for whoever asked the question.
I'm glad you brought it up, Maureen. Thank you.
I wonder where that is. It's probably in a crate somewhere in a warehouse.
It is, right, for sure.
Anyway, great.
Well, thank you both
everybody.
again.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.